We are now in the 11th chapter, chapter 11 of the book of Kohelet. And we are kind of still at the beginning of the chapter. We just started last week. But he's discussing this idea that we've been talking about of how a person should go about and utilize their resources, how they should be willing to take certain levels of risk with their finances, with their resources. On a spiritual level, they should be willing to try new things, push themselves to new spiritual frontiers. So that's what we've been discussing. And what I've actually thought about is this, we've kind of been addressing as a very long kind of the 10,000 feet position, from that elevation. We've been discussing this kind of question of why should you put in the effort that you have to do in this world? What's the point of it all? If anyway, things are unclear, you don't know what's going to happen, why put in all that effort? And I'm starting to realize, I think, that the purpose of him bringing up that question in the first place was really to wind down the end of the book. So think about it like this. We talked about before how the book is really divided into two parts, just right down the middle. From the middle of chapter 1 until chapter 7 was a discussion of happiness. Where do you find happiness? How does a person actually achieve happiness in this world, specifically under the sun, meaning in the context of the material world, right? He doesn't even really discuss the spiritual so much. And then starting from chapter 7, he's been discussing wisdom. We discussed how to achieve happiness. What about achieving wisdom? Okay. Now, as we're approaching the end of the book, so we're in the second to last chapter now, he's really winding down with it's almost like a general discussion of wisdom, of thoughts of wisdom, little pearls of wisdom. Some of the most famous phrases from the book are from these chapters. And so I almost feel, I don't know if this is accurate, but I almost feel like he brought up that question and that difficulty just to come and say, now that I've got you listening, so to speak, now that I've got you listening to what's going to be, what does it mean to be a well thought out and prepared individual, is now where he's going to be able to kind of stuff in a lot of important nuggets of information. I think that's just interesting because it's fascinating how he's created the stage to then portray these things, to then put out these nuggets of information. I really think that's what, in some ways, what he's doing. It's a subsection of the general discussion of how do you capture wisdom, or what are features of wisdom in this world, which is why he doesn't have to go and separate it out into a third part of the book, right? It's still part of that second half of the book, but it's different. It's almost like here's the old man giving you his axioms, his things he wants you to know to move forward. And they fit in the general context. So with that, we saw last week, he said, again, that you should work on diversification. Again, from one side, from the kind of physical side, you've got diversification of assets. You want to be able to spread your wealth out in a way so that it's not going to, you're not going to put all your eggs in one basket. And on the other side, from the spiritual perspective, there's also this idea of stretching yourself to achieve different things in your spiritual journey and not kind of just become a one-trick pony. He's going to continue on that theme. Again, I'm kind of going with the physical side because I think it works very well in the verses. The sages are always going to give us a more spiritual take, as do some of the commentaries, like Rashi, for example. But I think the words themselves really lend themselves to a very physical, not spiritual take, which itself is a feature, or in fact, a byproduct of wisdom. Okay. With that, let's go into our share screen. Okay, here we go. I hope you can see this. Should be able to see this. It's pretty large. We've got a smaller group tonight, so we'll see how far we get. And all right, so let's take this piece by piece. This is an interesting verse over here. He says, "In Yimalu ha'avim geshem," if the clouds fill with rain, al ha'aretz yariku, they will empty onto the land. Okay, that's pretty simple. V'im yipol eitz badarom, and if a wood, if a tree falls in the south, v'im batzafon, or even in the north, mikom sheyipol ha'eitz, the place where the tree falls, sham yehu, there will be. Okay, let's read that one more time before we discuss any of this. Im yimalu ha'avim geshem, if the clouds fill with rain, al ha'aretz yariku, they will empty onto the earth. V'im yipol eitz badarom, and if a wood, if a tree falls in the south, v'im batzafon, or even in the north, mikom sheyipol ha'eitz, the place where the tree falls, sham yehu, that's where it will be. Yes, I had a kind of a difficult time trying to figure out what was going on in this verse, what's really being expressed in the verse, because I couldn't first see really what the connection was to the previous discussion of how to allocate your finances. And again, from a spiritual side, how to allocate your spiritual resources, whatever it is. So I couldn't exactly understand what it was. I have to be guided by the commentaries over here because they give us probably the best, the most sense that I can make of the placement of this verse.
Rabbi, let me interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
I think the sound quality is a little bit less than stellar. Is there something on your end that's a little different?
I don't think so. Let me see if I could get maybe move some stuff around, maybe.
Thank you.
We're having the same problem with hearing too, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Is it
it's
just
sort
the
of a-
volume?
No,
No,
it's the quality of the sound. It's hard to get all your words.
Oh, okay.
But as you
Thanks.
speak now, it's a little better. Are you speaking into the microphone?
Not really. I'm just kind of speaking into the computer.
Hmm.
Let's see. My internet is fine, I think. So
Yeah.
maybe it's better when you talk to the computer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's
Something with the mic, maybe. Yeah.
maybe. Okay. Let's keep on going for right now and let me know if there's still problems. Okay. All right. So we're gonna read. I'll read the verse one more time, and we'll see. Then we can get into it. The verse says like this: Im yimalu ha'avim geshem, if the clouds fill with rain, al ha'aretz yariku, they will empty onto the earth. V'im yipol eitz badarom v'im batzafon, and if a tree falls either in the south or in the north, mikom sheyipol eitz, the place where the tree falls, sham yehu, there will be. Okay, so again, we have this interesting contrast between the clouds and the tree. Okay, let's just kind of explore the differences over here. Number one is that, or probably the main difference would be that the clouds give over something else. Okay, the clouds fill with rain and then empty it onto the earth. And there seems to be a distinction being drawn between that and the tree, where the tree lands wherever it lands. Okay, meaning the clouds take something, or they fill up with something, they pass it on to the land, as opposed to the tree, which stays stationary. Even if it falls down, it falls exactly where it is. Okay, again, it's a complicated verse in the sense, like, I don't know what it wants me to know necessarily. So based on that, we have to look in the commentaries. And the commentaries explain something actually very much related to what we've been talking about. Again, we've been talking about how to allocate your resources, both in a monetary sense, which you can obviously, again, translate into a spiritual sense, but really it's talking about a financial economic sense. Okay, and what they explain over here, the commentaries explain that if a person hoards their resources, their resources, they serve nobody. As opposed to if you spread your wealth, then they do good work. It does something for other people. Okay, so the mashal, the allegory over here is the two types of people, right? The one is the cloud. The cloud fills up with rain solely for the purpose, or eventually with the purpose of emptying it onto the ground. Okay, that's how the clouds work, as opposed to the tree. The tree is not mobile. It stays exactly where it is. And in fact, when it decides to finally give up its stuff, its wood or whatever it is, it falls where it is and it's done. It doesn't move anywhere else. Okay. Now, it's kind of a funny allegory because trees do give something, right? Trees give fruit. So if trees give fruit, in a certain sense, they are giving. They're giving the whole time, right? So what's so special about clouds, that clouds fill up just to empty while the tree stays the way they are, the way it is, and it falls where it is, if the trees the whole time are really giving their own fruits? That kind of bothered me about that explanation. However, I don't really see anything better, and it does fit very well with our context that we've been talking about. How do you allocate your resources? So you're saying over here, well, you could be convinced, you could be convinced that you should hoard your wealth or hoard your resources and wait for the right moment to give it up. Okay, you should you're hoarding money for a purpose, so I'm going to keep on hoarding it and hoarding it and hoarding it until the right time, and then I'll give it up. Okay, that is the tree mentality, and the tree mentality ends up falling exactly where it is without having done anything with its resources, as opposed to the clouds, which even as they fill up, right? He talks about in the present tense, im yumalu ha'avim geshem. If the clouds are filling with rain, it's almost already that they are going to empty onto the earth. Okay, so whereas a tree looks like it's a giver, in reality it's kind of stingy. It's miserly. It holds on to everything, and eventually when it falls down, it stays where it is. The clouds, on the other hand, look like they're hoarding, like it looks like it's gathering up rain, but the whole time it's actually for the right purpose. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm perceiving this difference. It's interesting because it's a strange correlation. Again, because I would think of trees as givers, but again, all the commentaries here are explaining that what's going on here is that the tree is the stingy person. Okay, in the allegory is the person who's stingy. A couple of things also stood out to me in this verse that were very kind of strange. I don't get the north or south thing. If the tree falls in the north or the south, the place it falls, there it will be. I don't know why he's focusing so much on the directions. I think it just means, I guess it doesn't really matter if it falls this way or that way. In the end of the day, it's going to just be there. It stays exactly there. So in other words, even if the end, let's translate it to the allegory. If in the end of the day, the person's money or the person's resources do go to a good purpose in the end, we'll call that the north. And it's going to be limited because they spent so much time hoarding it in the meantime. Okay, meaning if they had gone ahead and invested it the whole time, it would have brought more fruit. I guess, interestingly enough, it would have had more of an effect over the long term. Yeah, I once had a discussion with somebody. We were talking about the good parts and bad parts about taxes. Nobody loves taxes, right? The government takes your money, and if you're lucky enough, so to speak, they'll give some of it back to you at the end of the fiscal year, right? In other words, if you gave them too much money, they'll give you some of it back. And you get this kind of sense in your brain like, oh, I'm getting a check in the mail. it's kind of funny because it's your money, right? You could have had that money the whole time. And this person I was talking to was very upset over this because they said, if I had had that money, I could have invested it. And I would have been getting dividends the whole time, which in theory, they're correct. I know personally, I wouldn't have done that. I would end up spending it. It's kind of nice that I get the money held on for me, so I don't spend it. But for them, they were probably a little more financially thought out than I am. And they were saying how they'd rather hold on to it the whole time and have the opportunity to use it. It's kind of a similar thing over here. As when the clouds are filling with rain, you know that it's going for a good purpose. In the case of the tree is holding on to it. It's holding on to all of its resources, and eventually it falls. Even if it falls in the right direction, it's limited. It doesn't have the same power that it could have had. The idea that's being addressed here is that a person can pretend that they're waiting for all the right signs, right? I will do such and such when everything is good, right? I'll spend my money, I'll invest my money when the market gets better or gets worse, actually, right? Or I will give charity when I reach a certain amount of money in my own portfolio. I know that there was a Rabbi, I don't know who the people were, but Rabbi Spivak told me that there was somebody in town who said, "Oh, we have Bitcoin, and when Bitcoin reaches a certain amount of money, then we'll give it to the kollel." Well, if you know about Bitcoin, it didn't go that way, and it would have been better if they had given it to the kollel earlier. So, we convince ourselves that we're waiting for certain stars to line up, and then we'll do what we need to do. Again, that's to make your own money. That's to get the mitzvah of giving charity. Whatever it is, you're convincing yourself. A person can convince themselves that I'm waiting for things to pan out a certain way. So what he's saying over here is that's the tree, right? And you're going to end up with all this hoarded resources, and it's going to have nowhere to go. It falls north to the north, to the south. It doesn't matter. It's got nowhere to go, as opposed to the clouds, which fill up and then they empty. They actually empty the rain. They do something proactive with it. They transfer. What does rain do? It picks up water from one area and moves it and drops it somewhere else. So it creates a cycle that things are working and coexisting and working with each other. So that seems to be, again, according to the commentaries, that's the message over here. Again, I would not necessarily have seen in the words, but I don't have a better explanation. And it works well in the context, right? We're trying to figure out how to allocate resources. This is a good explanation of how he's bringing that to life, that a person needs to work on properly allocating their resources. Okay, so that is verse number 3. I don't see anything else more really to say on that. Actually, one thing before we move on that stood out to me. I love this word, Yoriku. Okay, so it shows up a number of places throughout Tanakh. The root there is resh yud kuf, which means empty. So it's a terminology we use by rain specifically, that the clouds empty out onto the land. I think it's just a cool visual. I happen to like that. It shows up in the closing verses of Micah. It shows up a number of different places. It's not such a common thing, but I just like the kind of visual of clouds emptying their rain onto the earth. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. All right. In that same vein, but kind of from a different direction, we have verse number 4. Okay, very similar idea, but it's a little different, and we'll explore that in a second. I happen to love this verse, and it has inspired me personally on a number of situations, and it's a simple verse, but I think it carries a lot of weight. And it says, "Shomer ruach lo yizra," the one who waits for the wind will not plant. V'roeh ve'ovim, and one who looks to the clouds, lo yiktzor, will not harvest. Okay, shomer ruach lo yizra, the one who waits for the wind, will not plant. V'roeh ve'ovim lo yiktzor, and one who looks to the clouds will not harvest. A very simple, wise verse. This is kind of a quintessential Kohelet right here, where he's saying it's a very, very simple idea expressed, but it's a very deep thought. That means if a person's looking and waiting for the right situations, the right circumstances to arise, they will end up doing nothing. Okay, it's a tool of the unfortunate character trait, the unfortunate midah of procrastination. Okay, when somebody is looking to procrastinate, they will look to these outside things and say, "Oh, today's not a good day for that." Right? Rather, I should wait for a different time. So it's like this. You're gonna want to plant seeds. Well, if the wind's blowing too hard, it's going to be very difficult to plant seeds. So you say, I'll wait till the wind dies down. Okay. And then what's going to happen is you wait till the wind dies down, and then it's too moist, or then it's too dry. In the end of the day, somebody who's waiting just for the wind to die down will not end up planting. You have to take the situation that you have, the windy day, and plant. Figure it out. Figure out how to move forward and say, this is the situation I'm in right now, and go with it. All right. Similarly, somebody who looks to the clouds says, "Oh, it might rain today. I don't want to harvest today. It might rain." Okay. Well, then they'll end up never harvesting. I think the visual is really great because these are things that the person needs. This is a thing that the person is depending on. They depend on the food. They need to plant it. They need to harvest it. We're not talking about extraneous, things. The nature of procrastination and avoidance is that it will show up even in things that the person needs to do for their survival. It needs to do. That's the kind of the danger, is that it's going to show up in that way. So I think it's a great kind of message and visual that he's saying. Not only does it get you to delay it, it says that somebody who waits for the wind and looks to the clouds will never plant and will never harvest. They won't even have those basic needs. So somebody who looks to the stars to fully align, somebody who waits for perfection will never find it. Perfection does not exist. It's a construct of our minds that does not exist. Okay, and that's really the message over here, is that you're never going to have that perfection. Okay, Jacob here on the in the chat says, his father used to say, it's better to be called and not be ready than ready and not called. Ready is overrated. Oh yeah, okay, I see that. Yeah. So in that sense, exactly. You're never going to be fully ready for something. And there's a lot of places, a lot of times throughout our lives where we need to be going in a certain direction. It's time for something to happen. And if we wait to be ready, like Jacob said, perfect. If we wait to be ready, we're never going to be ready. Okay, we'll always have something to turn to and say, I'm not there yet. I'm not quite ready yet. This one hits hard. It hits me personally very. I have to remind myself of this verse and remind myself of this concept very often, because I know that there's things personally that I'll push off because I'm not quite ready for that yet. And in reality, I think that's not the case. I think you have to grab the bull by the horns when the opportunity arises. So what's the difference between verse number 3 and verse number 4? Okay, again, verse number 3, with our clouds carrying rain as opposed to a tree that just falls and does nothing. So that was telling us that you shouldn't be waiting for things to happen. You shouldn't wait for yourself for your own resources to reach a certain point and then give them over. And then we have over here somebody who looks to the sky, who looks to all these other signs. Will never be ready. So what's the difference between verse number 3 and verse number 4? It could just be a repetition. That does happen sometimes. But I think there is an essential difference between the two of them. And that's that verse number 3 is where I am ready. Okay, it's the question of whether I have everything, all my ducks in a row to start doing things. I'm collecting I'm collecting nutrients right now. I'm not ready to give over my fruit yet. I'm not ready to reign yet. Okay, so that's me personally. Verse number 4 is the world outside of me. Okay, if I'm waiting for other things to work out, that's a different thing. So we have to address both of these things because they're two different paradigms of procrastination. Okay, there are two different ways of excusing not doing something. So if the general discussion, as we mentioned, if the general discussion is putting in effort, why should you put in effort? We don't know. The world is a dangerous place. Who knows what's going to happen? Why should I put in the effort? He says, well, so again, there's two reasons why a person would be pushing off and procrastinating their own betterment. Number one is they convince themselves that they're waiting for themselves to be ready. And number two is that they convince themselves that they're waiting for the situation around them to be ready. You have, as wisdom comes, it has to address both of those. Because a guy will say, "Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready. It's just the world around me is not ready yet." Okay, so they sound like they actually make sense. I'm ready. It's just the stock market's not ready yet. That itself, he's addressing, that's still an excuse. Or the other way, you say, "Oh, all the stars are aligned, everything is ready to go. I'm not ready yet," right? So both of those things, they both are true. They both are excuses that we give ourselves. Okay, in one sense, the person is selfish. The tree is selfish. It's unhelpful. It just falls and stays right there. The other one is kind of a laziness. When you're waiting for the outside world to catch up and start working for you, that's a laziness. So it's almost two features of procrastination. The tendency for a person to push off things, again, things that have to get done. They need to get done. There's two directions where that comes from. Number one is rooted in selfishness, and number two is rooted in laziness. Okay, so these are both things that have to be addressed. A person has to both not wait for the world to catch up to them and also not wait for themselves to catch up to the world. Both things are true. Okay, I hope that's helpful. That should be a satisfying explanation, at least I believe, of verse 3 and verse 4. Okay, and that leads us to verse 5. So he's going to be discussing over the next few verses how to go about or how to see that. This is a very strange verse. It's very strange because the allegory, the story behind it is strange. The words are strange. So I really had to kind of scratch my head on this one, but I found that once again the commentaries are in agreement, and it actually makes sense in context, and it's an interesting verse. So let's take it piece by piece. He says, "Ka'asher incha yodea ma derech haruach," just like you do not know the path of the wind. Ka'atzamim beveten hamleah. Okay, we're going to hold off on translating that, but that's the allegory. Okay, you don't know what's going to happen to the wind, just like etzamim beveten hamleah. We'll discuss in a second what that is. Kacha, similarly, lo teda et maaseh Elokim, you do not know the actions of God, asher yaseh et hakol, which to put everything into action. Okay, let me hold off on rereading the verse because we have to address what this phrase is. Beten is a stomach. Okay, Veten is the stomach, the abdomen. Okay, and it's a beten hamleah would be a full stomach. What are atzamim? There's two possibilities. The word itself, practically speaking, means bones. Okay, bones, B-O-N-E-S. Right? Really, that should be atzamot. Right? That would be usually bones would be with a ot ender, not atzamim. That's kind of strange. Atzamim would almost mean selves. Okay, that's also very strange. Like an etzem, where we say atzmi, myself. Okay, so which is actually really the same word. Your bones are the structure of your being, so that it's a related We call yourself the etzem, right? The self is called that because it's the bones of the person. When Adam gave up a bone for Eve, right? So again, he gave up some of himself to create this other being. But the commentaries go in a different direction. They don't go with bones, which I find interesting. That should be the basic understanding of the verse here. But they learn that etzem means tightly closed, like something that like your eyes are tightly closed. Okay, they have sources elsewhere in Tanakh that use the phrase etzem to mean tightly closed. So either way, the reference would be to a fetus in the mother's stomach. Okay, it's either bones or some self in the full stomach. Okay, so a baby in its mother's womb, or something closed off, completely closed off in the mother's womb, in the mother's stomach. Okay, that is how all the commentaries I saw explain that that's what we're talking about. It's a strange thing. It's a strange way to express that idea. But now let's plug that into the verse, okay? Kasher incha yodea maderech haruach, just like you do not know the way of the wind, ka'atzamim beveten hamleah, just like you don't know what's going on with a child in its mother's stomach, with a fetus in its mother's stomach. Kacha, similarly, lo teda et maseh ha'elokim, you do not know the actions of God, asher ya'aseh et hakol, that cause everything to happen, that do everything. Okay, so again, really strange visual over here. You don't know what happens in the wind. You don't know what happens in the mother's stomach. Similarly, you don't know what happens. What are the actions of God? The number of the commentaries here point out that what's the similarity between the wind and what's in a mother's stomach is that in both those cases, there's, you know, something is going to happen, but you don't know what's going to happen. Okay, you know the wind's going to come. You just don't know what it's going to bring with it, right? It could bring a storm. It could bring a sandstorm. It could bring sunshine. It could bring anything, right? Similarly, if a woman is expecting, is pregnant, then you also don't know what's the nature of the child. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Is it, you know, what's going to happen with this child? It's all fully in potential, right? So at this point, the wind, the baby, it's in potential. And there's going to be some outcome. We just don't know what it is yet. So just like you don't know what's going to happen with the wind, and just like you don't know what's going to happen with a fetus, similarly, you don't know the actions of God that cause everything to happen. Okay, again, it's a strange verse. It's a weird one. You know, it's a real kind of a head scratcher over there. I find it fascinating that he says this, and we live in a time in 2023 where we kind of know what the wind is going to bring. I got a 10-day forecast on my phone, right? So it changes here and there. You know, it's not 100% accurate, but we got a general sense. Similarly, we have a general sense of what happens in a womb, right? Nowadays, with the technology that we have, with ultrasound technology, we have a pretty good sense of what happens in the womb. We can tell what gender it is usually prior to its birth. So it's a kind of a funny thing that its two examples are things that we believe that we have pretty good control over nowadays. Guess what? We still don't have such great control over it. You know, we can't control the weather. Even when we know that the weather's coming, there's only so much we could do. You know, and even if you have the knowledge of what's happening in the womb, there's only so much you could do. You know, I remember. So we used to live in Phoenix for 2 years. And Phoenix gets monsoons. So that's beautiful, sunny day, middle of summer, you know, everything's fantastic. And suddenly the sky turns purple and there's lightning and thunder and rain and cats and dogs, and it comes out of nowhere. You know, you can't even, there's only so much that the weather will alert you beforehand because it really comes very suddenly. So it's fascinating how it almost is a message that survives throughout the generations, because you think, you know, the message almost changed throughout all of history. I would say It was, yeah, who knows what the wind's going to be? Who knows what's inside happening with the fetus? Now it's almost changed. Like, you think you know what's going to happen. You think you know what's going on with the fetus, but still you don't. So similarly, you don't understand the actions of God, the Ma'aseh Elokim. Now, I remember now that we spoke about Ma'aseh Elokim. It came up a long time ago in the book. And there we explained that Ma'aseh Elokim, on one sense, there's a spiritual sense of the actions of God. Who knows what punishments or gifts, what he's going to grant to the world. Yes, that is one explanation of it. But we had another explanation that the acts of God are the scientific marvels in this world, things that you can look at and say, wow, that's an act of God, right? Something amazing and is mind-blowing, not just in a spiritual sense, but also kind of just scientific. The scientific wonders of this world are also Ma'aseh Elokim. So similarly, just like you don't know any of these things, you also can't even begin to understand the amazing things that are existent in this world, okay? That cause everything else to happen, right? It takes, 20 minutes of watching a nature documentary to realize that, oh my gosh, the amount of things that are interconnected just to make sure that everything works out. I remember once seeing, it must have been a David Attenborough documentary, and he was talking, I think it was, he was talking about how there's this little microscopic life form that gets picked up in the Sahara and then travels over the ocean in rain to the Amazon and waters and comes down in rain in the Amazon. And if it wasn't for that microscopic organism, like the whole ecosystem would be off and the world would be in a lot of trouble, right? So that's usually the outcome, right? And it has to be that way. So there's all these things that are locked away. We don't get a chance to see all these things, but they're happening. Okay. So in that sense, it's very interesting. He's coming to the same question that we started with, of why should I put in labor if nothing is predictable? If everything is a mystery, why should I put in the labor that I need to? Why should I do all that work that I supposedly need to do? Well, part of his answer is that's why you gotta keep things ahead. You have to plan things ahead. You don't know what the rain is going to bring, so don't put all your assets into the crop. You don't know what's with this child, so don't lay all your hopes in this one thing. You don't know what's all these things going on around you. You just don't know. So instead of saying, he's saying the opposite of what the fool said. The fool looked at that and said, why bother? Why bother with everything? He says the exact opposite. The path of wisdom is to look at that same thing and say, you know what, I'm going to plant over here, and I'm going to plant over here, and I'm going to invest money over here, and I'm going to, come up with some other ideas, because you don't know what's going to bring. This is going to get fleshed out more in the following verse, but we don't have time for that tonight. So instead, we're gonna stop here, and we'll pick up with verse number 6 next week. We've got 25 verses left in the whole book. We're actually really getting close. The 11th, I looked it up today. The 11th and 12th chapters are very short, or compared to some of the other chapters we've had. So this is kind of exciting. We're getting to the crescendo of what he's trying to tell us. So thank you for joining us tonight. It's